Hello class and welcome to the video. This is your instructor Nora Villarreal speaking, and today I just want to take you through a quick example of searching the library databases. So I've got a little PowerPoint slide up here with some tips that you've already read about, but I thought it would be helpful to see them laid out this way. And the first bullet point talks about creating a list of search terms using the info that you were given in this week's readings. So depending on your topic that you've chosen for Essay 2 or for your research paper when you get to that assignment, one of the first things you're going to want to do is to create a list of search terms that you can use to look for information. And keep in mind that you can also use synonyms, right? So if your first search terms aren't yielding good results for you, remember you can jump to some synonyms, try to find some words that have similar meanings, and use those in your searches, and maybe you'll get some better results. The next thing you'll want to do is to select a few databases to look at. So I'll give you some examples today of some useful databases, but really all that entails is just looking at the databases, checking out their descriptions, and choosing those that seem the most appropriate for whatever your project might be. You'll want to start with some broad searches, and then you're going to narrow and refine those results. So you'll notice that when you first begin searching, just like when you search on Google for sources, you might end up with literally millions of sources, but I'm going to show you some tips and techniques to narrow those down because nobody has time to look through a million sources for a research paper. Something that's really important, you guys, that I want to stress is to save sources that look promising. So in other words, don't rely on recreating your search to find those sources again. There's a good chance you won't be able to. Some of these databases add literally thousands of articles a day. So one search that you do one day may give you completely different results the next day. So if you find something that looks good, make sure that you save it. Once you've found some sources that look promising, go ahead and skim them. So you don't need to read each source in its entirety. That's something that kind of trips students up. Sometimes they say, oh my gosh, well I found 20 sources that I think look good. How the heck am I ever going to read all these? You don't necessarily have to read them all word for word. You want to start by just skimming them, right? Look for headings, look for keywords, look at the first words and first sentences and paragraphs to try to find clues to sort of how relevant it is. And once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly, okay, this looks like something I can use, or okay, this is something that's not going to work for my project. I'm kind of old school, so I do recommend printing the articles that you find in order to highlight them, in order to annotate them. I just find them much easier to work with as a hard copy, as a printed copy. Some of you might prefer to work on the computer, but actually studies even show that printing your sources tends to be a better way to go when it comes to research. My last tip too will be to create a works cited page for the sources that you'll use. So once you find a source and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to use this for my essay, one of the first things you should do will be to create the works cited entry for that source, and then you can just keep adding them as you go. So a lot of times what I'll do is just keep Noodlebib open in another browser window. I find a source that looks good, I think I'm going to use it, I'm going to go ahead and create that works cited entry first things first, so I have it ready to help me figure out my in-text citation, and so that it's done for me so I don't have to do it at the end of the project. That can be very helpful. Okay, so now I have jumped to the IVCC homepage, and as I mentioned in the introduction to the video, I just want to give you a quick rundown of how to choose sources and how to actually go about searching them. So one of the first things you can do is head up to your quick links menu here and go to the library's homepage. There's obviously tons of resources on here that you can use, but today we're looking at our databases. So I want you to choose all databases over here on the left-hand side. Now you'll see that our library is awesome, and it provides a ton of databases to choose from, and it might look overwhelming at first. So I'm going to give you a heads up on some useful databases that might be useful for Essay 2 and for your research project. But you should take the time to kind of browse through them and see what we have, because we have some really amazing ones. So like for example, if you're a nursing major, which I know some of you are, we have a database that's just dedicated for nursing. We won't look at it for this project, of course, but that might be useful in some of your other classes. So some databases that I want to highlight for Essay 2 and for your research project, okay? Number one is this guy right here, one of the first ones listed, Academic Search Complete. You can see that there's a little description under here that describes what it's all about, and this sort of covers, as it says, it covers many disciplines. It's all over the place. It has tons of awesome articles on a ton of really great resources. So that's kind of a good starting point, okay? Other great resources for SA2 might be the African American Experience Database. Has some really, really interesting and useful resources that are focused specifically on, as it says, the African American experience. And notice that it even includes this term slave narratives here, just like with 12 Years a Slave. So that one might prove useful for us. We also have the Alexander Street Press American History in Video. You might be able to find a cool video to use as a source. Okay, so don't be afraid to think outside the box a little bit. Another one I wanted to point out as I scroll down here, we have Black Thought and Culture. Might be useful for you. Britannica is okay. A lot of people want to jump to it. We want to usually stay away from the more encyclopedia type sources in college. They're not usually the most useful. Okay, I'm going to keep scrolling here. The Facts on File, oh, there goes a reminder for me. The Facts on File resources can also be quite useful. So Issues and Controversies, contains more than 800 topics in politics and pop culture and all kinds of useful things. World News Digest might be useful for you. So you can see as what I'm doing here is just sort of skimming through their descriptions and looking at which ones might be useful. As I said, you usually want to stay away from encyclopedias, so I would go ahead and skip that. Another really great resource for when you're looking at books, when you're doing kind of literary criticism or literary analysis, are these Gale sources right here. Okay, we've got Gale Literature Criticism Online and the Gale Virtual Reference Library. So those are some other databases that you might consider using either for SA2 or for your research paper. Okay, let's actually start with the Gale Virtual Reference Library as I run through how to search for you. So you'll click on the database. A lot of times there's another screen that gives you some helpful information about how to cite from the source or whatever it might be. Don't forget, if you're off campus, you're going to need to authenticate. So I'm going to need to put in my 14-digit ID number here and my password. That's going to get me into the library databases. That lets them know that, yes, I'm an IVCC student. Excuse me. And let's say that I was hoping to find something about the invention of wings in this source. So I'm just going to start by doing a basic search, and I'm going to put in that title and see if I'm able to come up with anything. And I'm also going to make sure I spell it correctly. Now notice I put it in quotation marks because what that does is it tells the search engine to only look for these words in this particular order. So it's not just going to look for invention or wings or anything. It's going to look specifically for this. But oops, I didn't find any results. Okay. So I'm going to think for a second and think, okay, there's nothing under that title. What else can I try to find some information? So instead of the invention of wings, I'm going to use the author's name, which is Sue Monk Kidd. Now notice she's actually popping up here, so I can just go ahead and type it in, or I can choose the search suggestion and then click search. Now I am getting some results. You can see that I'm getting results for a book titled The Secret Life of Bees. This is another book that Sue Monk Kidd wrote, which by the way is awesome and I highly, highly recommend it. It's on a little bit more modern subject. But it's not related specifically to my book, but what I can find out if I look at this little summary here of what it talks about, there's a biography in here of Sue Monk Kidd. That could be really useful for SA2 or for a research project. Same thing down here. This source has an interview with her. That could be useful. And then boom, right here, our third entry has actually a biography of Sue Monk Kidd. So I can go ahead, pop in here, just click the title of it. And there's a couple options for how I can read this. So I can just jump through the hyperlink to the part that I'm interested in. Okay, I just want to read her biography, so I can click right there. Or I can just kind of scroll through and read through it. There's a picture of her. So if you prefer to read online, go for it. Notice over here, don't ever forget to look around kind of at the sides of your sources that you're looking at. There are often ways to go ahead and cite If I click this, it's going to show me how to cite this source in MLA style, which is amazing. Okay, a lot easier than when I was in college, I can tell you that. Now keep in mind, these aren't always correct, so you might have to double check it, make sure that it is correct, but usually they're pretty on point. And there's also some ways to save these articles. So you can email it to yourself, you can download it, you can print it, you can save it. You can even download this as an MP3 file and listen to it if you prefer. Now, when I read these articles, I usually prefer to view them as a PDF for two reasons. Number one, they're easier on my eyes. Just as a reader, I find them easier to use. And number two, it makes it really clear what the page numbers are. So if you look here, as it's showing the PDF, if I needed to cite from this page here, you can see right here, boom, I'm on page 884. So it makes it really, really useful. Okay. Something else I wanted to point out is often one successful search can lead you to some other resources. So notice there's some related subjects over here, and maybe I wanted to look at women in literature, so I could go ahead and click that heading, and it's going to give me some more wonderful, useful resources. So that's Gale Virtual Reference Library. Let's take a look back at one of the other databases that's a little bit more complex to search. Now, really quickly, I did just a basic search in the Gale Virtual Reference Library. Notice you can do an advanced search. So if you wanted to add search terms, if you wanted to use more than one term, if you wanted to specify whether this is a keyword or that you were looking at a publication title or that you were looking for a specific author, you can do it that way, and you can also refine your search a little bit more down here. And that's true of all databases. You can always refine your searches. So I'm just going to head back to the library. I'm going to again go to all databases. And I want to take just a quick look at the Academic Search Complete option. This is a little bit harder to search, but it's also extremely useful. Okay, so let's say I'm coming to Academic Search Complete and I want to look up information about the Grimke sisters. So I'm going to type in just their last name. See, I have a suggestion that pops up already. Let's see how many results I get just with this. I've got 5. Okay, so maybe these 5 results are useful. Okay, maybe I can just use one of these. I'm going to go ahead and just look up the word Grimke and see what happens. Now when I type in Grimke, I get 104. Okay, so I've got a few more options to look at here. Now this is actually a pretty low search result. Let's say I want to do something like slavery. I'm going to get 21,000 results, which is way, way too many, right? So this is where we want to start refining. So we're going to go ahead, I'm just going to shrink my screen a little bit here so that you can see what I'm up to. I'm going to go ahead and choose this as the subject term. I'm going to add America, not marijuana, America, as another subject term. And now my results are shrinking, as you'll notice. I went from 21,000 to 1,000, okay? Now something I want you to always make sure you do when you're in these databases, you guys, really important, choose full text. If you don't choose full text, what's going to happen is that you're going to get results that you can't actually read. So you're going to get abstracts for articles that we don't have access to. I don't want anybody ever having to pay for an article. So if you choose full text, you'll avoid that. That also dropped my search results from 1,000 something to 680, okay? Now again, no matter what database you're in, you're going to have options to refine your results. So if I look over here, I might say, okay, I just want to look in magazines right now and see what kind of results I get. Now we're down to 223. So again, you can see that we're getting more manageable with our results here, okay? You might also say, you know what, 1978 is too late of a publication, that's too long. I'm going to zip this up and say I only want things since the year 2000, about 15 years. So now we're down to 196. So again, we're kind of cutting in half each time we go ahead and limit our results in this case. Okay. Now something else you can refine by, which is usually pretty useful, is language. A lot of times you'll get maybe papers in Spanish, and if you're lucky and you're bilingual, maybe you can read those. But most of us, or some of us, aren't lucky enough to read in 2 or 3 languages, so we usually want to look for our native language. Something you can always skip, you guys, is book results. Any book reviews like you see right here, we don't want to use book reviews. They're not useful sources, okay? Now, let's say you're not getting any good results here. Remember, you can further refine by subject. Maybe you want to look up Civil War. Notice here, there's only 30